Welcome to Yes Also. I'm Susie Barrett. My guest today is an indisputable improv legend, Joe Canale. For years, Joe was one of the kingpins of I.O. in Chicago. He was also on the main stage at Second City Chicago. He did a year at Boom Chicago in Amsterdam, and he was in the very first Second City cruise ship cast. He also tours with Tim Meadows, Matt Walsh, and Brad Morris, so if you haven't seen them yet, check them out when they come to your city. Joe was one of my heroes when I was coming up in Chicago, so it was really cool to hear his side of some of these stories. He tells a hilarious story about getting an audience to prank Charna. Just a lot of good stuff in here. For our premium subscribers, don't forget to check out the bonus content. There are some great deleted scenes there. One of them is a story about Joe trying to improvise on LSD. And if you're not yet a subscriber, all you have to do is head to yesalso.supercast.com. I will say also that Joe's picks are incredible, so make sure you head to Instagram at yesalsopod and check them out. Okay, let's take it away. Joe Canale, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yes.
Very excited. I'm a big improv dork, so this is like about as big as it gets for me.
When did the improv dorkdom start for you?
As soon as I saw improv, really, I went to school in upstate New York, and a guy who I went to school with, I was a wise ass everywhere. And again,
You can take the past tense out of that sentence.
yes, true. I was a wise ass, but now
I'm evolved
I'm
past
straight edge with comedy. No wise ass at all. I've listened to a number of your episodes, which I encourage other people to do, and I may reference that at certain points in things. But I heard you mention that moving around is a commonality, and I did that as well. I went to like 5 or 7 schools before high school, I think, and because we were just moving a bit. And I think humor was developed in that way, as being a wise ass and kind of getting attention that way. And ADD is also, I think, a commonality with a lot of improvisers.
You have made the statement to me before, all improvisers are neurodivergent.
Yes, yeah, and my wife, who hopefully you could have on, she now is in marriage and family therapy. She worked at Second City with me as well. That's where a lot of it, she was kind of cluing me in on that, and I totally agree with it. And,
yeah.
And with neurodivergence often comes above average intelligence too, which I think is another, and this may be arrogance, but I think improvisers have to be, if not intelligent, clever. And I think actually they're kind of one and the same. A type of intelligence. You may not have, like Chris Farley maybe didn't get a 1500 on his SATs, but he had an emotional intelligence that was super high. Like, I do think that to do improv, at least at the level of being able to charge money for it, let's say, is kind of a higher caliber. A lot of dumb actors, not as many dumb improvisers.
Right. Yeah. Well, you can phone in a scripted performance to some degree that you can't phone in improv.
Absolutely
or people
not.
will know
Absolutely
it. It's
not.
like,
yes, unless that's your intention.
Right.
We might get to it some point.
Name names. No, the level of
me in the right night.
Yeah. The level of having to lock in, pay attention, and have lots of plates spinning at the same time does demand a certain type of thinking and intelligence, even if you're not witty or clever. And some people are that on top of that. Yeah.
But your brain has to have some kind of level of organization that is able to do that.
And the connection making. Yeah. Good improv, especially good long form improv.
Yes.
Is rife with connections and overlap and things that pay off later. And
And that, yes, a mind that's working is necessary for that. And intellectual curiosity is important, I think, too, which is what draws a lot of people to that.
Yeah.
And then, I don't want to just spill out everything all at once, but like, I think the personality of improvisers, I did team sports, and I carry that into improv as well. And I think maybe that had something to do with liking it versus something like stand-up, which is, again, I have a great admiration for stand-ups. Many of them, in a way, they're like philosophers of our many of them are also sociopaths, so it's a fine line there. But it's a solitary profession and art form as well. And I don't get as much interest out of that.
Yeah, you'd rather be in the choir than be the preacher.
Yes. Despite the fact I certainly preach a lot, but that's an anti-authority thing. I preach up.
Yeah.
I don't like to preach down. I also like to punch up and don't like to punch down. Sometimes I'm just flailing wildly, and there may be collateral damage, but generally my aim is up.
So speaking of ADD, so the first time you saw improv was in upstate New York.
No. Someone told me to move to Chicago for Second City. Thank you for
you were
getting
at
it.
college
You're going to
in
have to keep
upstate
us
New
on
York.
track.
I got you.
SUNY Albany, and there's all these schools, Florida, Northwestern, obviously, Emerson, that produce all these improvisers, William and Mary. My school, there was me. There was Aaron Haber, who was a guy in Chicago who like started some theaters. That's it.
Yeah.
No, there's no like mafia.
You weren't a pipeline of
no state school mafia of comedy. But I did move out with 4 or 5 other people, all actors. I auditioned for Second City 2 or 3 days after I got to Chicago. Did not have a headshot. Kristen Ford is a woman who worked at Second City. I was later on a team with her. She was in the touring company. She was working and running the audition at the time. And I didn't have a headshot, so I thought I was clever, and I drew a dumb picture on the back, and I was like, here's my head. And I just remember just the look of disdain that she had when I handed it into her.
You
and I was
ass.
like, and I have a thing for women who kind of hate me. That's like, we could trace this back to me taunting my mother and making her enraged. Like you could just the psychological line is just straight.
And as that 8-year-old, you were like, all press is good press. Like if this is
attention,
then I'm happy.
Attention.
Yeah.
And I've developed this kind of thing where I want applause, but I want it to be grudging. I want people to be like, motherfucker, this guy, I do not want to be clapping for this. But God damn it, I am.
You want them to applaud despite the fact that you annoy them.
There's a lot of contradictions. Like I feel like I present as a misogynist, but I truly am not. I really am a feminist, but even before having daughters. But and people should not have to have daughters to be feminists.
Thank you for saying it.
However, like as we chart my improv thing, I was thinking this on the way over here. Women have really, and for improv in general, played an important part and yet gotten a kind of a diminished recognition in a way. And that's something as I was saying before we went on air, I do a podcast as well, which is focused on improv. It's a Second City podcast, so it's all people who work there, but it's so many of the same people. The crossover is there. It just happens that they were in Chicago. But in doing that, I learned a lot. I had always thought, it's the experience of a lifetime, and it was for me and for a lot of other people. Almost every straight white dude had the same experience.
This is the best, not a single problem.
And everyone who comes back says this is the best job you'll ever have in your life. But of course, those are the people who are coming back.
Yeah.
You're not, you're never meeting the people who are coming back like this.
Right.
And there aren't a ton, but the majority of them were not white male. And so what's the commonality there?
Right.
And so you start examining that. And again, I was lucky enough. I moved to Chicago. I got into the Second City Conservatory. And then, so I got into classes at Second City and very quickly found out about I.O. through Frank Janish, was a guy who was a manager at I.O. at the time and taking classes at Second City. So very quickly I got there, and talking about classes, I ended up hosting a show that I got my classes for free, which was very rare, very lucky.
How did you get chosen to host a show?
Craig Kikowski, who you had on, and Peter Gwynn, another improviser of his ilk. And let me just backtrack for a second and say the first show I saw was Frank Booth in the Blue Velvet Lounge, is what it was called, at I.O. in the downstairs cabaret. I believe it was directed by Craig, who was the coach of Frank Booth. Regardless, they had different light spots, and the lighting person would just switch to these different couples. It was basically like in a bar format, and then they would go to these vignettes, and once the lights are up on you, you're improvised.
That's amazing.
Improvised.
So the couple would be like
at the bar,
sitting at the bar, sitting at a table, standing in the corner,
all around the space.
That's great.
And the lighting person was also, I guess, kind of directing in a way, because wherever the lights go is where the next thing. And I thought it was scripted. It's one of like the first time you see really good improv. If you've never seen it, you don't believe it in a way.
Yeah.
Now I know it was improvised because I could do that 100 times. But again, you're like that. That's it. The first time you see brilliant improv, you're like,
yeah.
what? And for someone with ADD, whether they know it or not, that is very appealing. Like no memorization, no preparation,
and you don't have to do the same thing
you're
every
just
fucking
flying by
day.
the seat of your wits.
Yeah.
And whatever you can, and again, you have to have a certain arrogance perhaps to do that, an entitlement perhaps. And I've always thought that my entitlement was intelligence. I later learned it was white male privilege.
Yeah.
I had attributed it to my great intellect, which I'll still maintain my arrogance in that regard. But that's only through experience in the last 50 years of my life of being like, well, like Carlin says, think of how dumb the average person is. And then half of
people are dumber than
exactly,
that. Right.
Exactly.
Not how averages work, but I will. Yeah. But I do love that joke.
So
yeah.
That's a smart improviser.
He's talking about the mean rather than the, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. But again,
I want to pause for a second and say like when you said it takes a certain arrogance to do, in my experience, like especially starting out, I didn't feel that arrogance. I was very often terrified, but I loved it so much and wanted to get better at it. So there's almost like an addiction that happens to like, well, because I want to do this, I'm willing to endure the whatever pain. I didn't feel the arrogance.
But again, maybe these are the differences in our experiences. There's the trope of the guy who's super loud in the first class is always gets on the team because there's that. And I'm not a loud improviser. I'm a loud person generally. But like that's not my style of yelling. But maybe that's what we're talking about, where it's like I never felt impaired. I never felt judged. I was, it's all about like my demographic perhaps.
Right.
And that's how I went into that. Whereas, and this is again, I've heard many women echo the same thing where maybe you had to approach it from like, okay, I'm going to overcome this.
I'm going to try to
overcome these assholes who are yelling.
I'm going to try to get a word in with all of these straight white dudes.
And again, and that is the prevalent. And here's the shame of it all. And again, we were talking before about Charna, and Charna is a friend of mine. I got to say,
I don't know how.
I know. Well, all of her friends, her good friends, are white male dudes,
right?
Except for a couple exceptions.
But knowing you and knowing your like that you
it's so
see
weird.
Things for what they
Andrew
are.
Alexander from Second City, the owner of that place, I also am good friends with. Though the producer who was below him, I am not good friends with. And that's where and I would go at Charna. Here's why I'm friends with Charna. She allowed me to say anything I wanted to her on behalf of anyone I want. And that's what I would try to, and that's where I try to put my privilege now, is I know that people will let the fucking loud dude who's always been loud say shit. That's my privilege. People will listen to me. So now I have to make sure what I say is helping those who don't have the opportunity to get hurt.
You're wielding a sword on behalf of
and I don't want to do white savior shit either. But it's like I got kicked out of that place more than anyone. I guarantee.
Kicked out
from IO. I was banned from IO many times. Like I had the audience text her the word selfish one time. The whole audience. One time she was she got my car towed for fucking, or she was going to get it towed. I moved it. I was there on a Saturday night doing a show. She wasn't using her spot. I knew that. Someone told her so she would hire these managers who were like fucking snitches. And
I remember.
Yeah. And I'm there doing a free show for you that you're charging money for.
And she wasn't using her spot anyway.
No, but she found out I was in it and was going to call a freaking tow truck. And then, that's maybe when I got the audience to do selfish.
This is so funny.
Sorry. And I was just telling her yesterday. So I was talking to her yesterday. Again, she's doing a memoir. I may help her with it. And I understand Charna and how she is. I will try to get her to acknowledge some of this stuff.
Right.
But it's not my memoir. You know what I mean? Like, and that is what my privilege has been, is like, Charna, you can't say women of size.
Right.
You can't do this, that, whatever thing it is. then I'll be banned for a week or two, and then people will be like, after enough people are like, he was right, and really you look like an idiot kicking somebody out for defending someone for you being an idiot about. Yeah. And eventually I'd get back. But I don't know if that happens if I'm black. I don't know if that happens if I'm a woman. Getting back in time and time again. What is permitted there was different. And that comes from Dell. That's something, Dell, like separating the art from the artist, right? Mm-hmm. Picasso was a horrible fucking misogynist as well. Dell was like, the one thing you can say about Dell is he hated everything. So there was no bias in that. He hated everyone.
Just miserable.
Seemingly.
Yeah.
Like, he was racist, he was sexist, and he was racist across all things. But he wouldn't.
That was the only thing he wasn't discriminating in was his racism.
Discrimination.
Yeah.
Again, across the board, he had a talk about an arrogance, and I think he also had a lot of resentment. Who knows? I think it could have been that, Elaine May chose Mike Nichols and not him. And that could have sent him on the fucking... He was in love with... I could see why.
I mean, yeah, how couldn't you be?
I mean, I think I'm in love with Elaine May.
I'm resentful that she chose Mike Nichols.
You and I are going to be fighting trying to get her on our podcast.
Yeah.
Ultimately, she should probably do... Again, yours first, but my privilege says I want her on mine.
Definitely do mine and not the place that she worked at.
But again, we talk about the privilege and things like that. Regardless, she's like Joni Mitchell.
Yeah.
Everyone who met her probably was in love with her. And I think he got his heart broken by her and carried that and took it out. And also Mike Nichols, Nichols and May were doing their stuff. This was they were his contemporaries.
Right.
And he went in a different direction and went into committee and all that kind of anti...
Yeah, he was not doing tuck shirt
stuff.
comedy.
No.
Yeah.
And yet he was wearing that stuff. There was a picture in Time magazine of the Grateful Dead. It's like this kaleidoscopic picture of them, taken with a exposed frame, and it's all blurry and stuff. And in the background of the picture, there's a dude in a suit, and it's fucking Dell.
No way.
Yeah, I sent it to
Is he
Charna.
Labeled in the picture?
No, but he's just standing there, like in a suit, and there's all these freaking hippies
just
all
like
around.
Zelig, like appearing in all
and
these.
Yes, and that's the thing. He's a guy who deserves a biography because his life was so weird.
He has one.
Yes, yes, it's going around, but it'll become a hagiography or whatever, and this is not a person who should necessarily be deified as a saint. He had a lot of demons and stuff, and just because he had one good idea, it was not solely his. And I think what happened is the good stuff was the art form, the bad stuff was the culture that he not encouraged, but just had no patience for not being an asshole.
Right.
And that was enabled.
Right.
All across the board. And that's the thing. You have Charna and then you have Joyce at Second City kind of enabling this culture of male-dominated privilege, giving the guys alcohol and everything. And now Joyce was a much more compassionate person than Charna. If somebody needed money for the rent, she'd front it or whatever and looked out for people. But at the same time, in talking to a lot of these dudes from, let's say, the 80s and 90s, if you wanted to work at Second City in the 80s and you were a guy, fucking drive to Chicago, walk into the bar, tell Joyce you want to work at Second City, and in like 2 hours, you're auditioning with the main stage cast up there. Like Ron West was walking by, they needed a director, and someone was like, hey, he looks like a director. He was in the building. He was working there, but they were like, Ron looks like a director.
Looks like a director. He does, but...
that's what it was like then.
Oh, my God.
And it wasn't like that. It continually got more professional.
Can you imagine any other profession like that? Like, you look like a doctor. Hey, can you come into this OR?
Football coaches are like that.
Yes,
because it's like, oh, you're a Shanahan. All right, you could coach.
Yeah, well, yeah.
There's a lot of nepotism in coaching.
Yeah. But they at least have to like be in the world. Yeah.
Yes. No,
but to imagine being like, you look like you could fly a plane. Can you grab this Delta flight and take it to New York really quick?
Yeah. There's a number of commercial campaigns built on like that kind of a concept.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah. So it was like that was the world that was acceptable there, and to that point, it's easy to like fall into that world if you're a dude who it favors. You know, like the whole, like, I remember people talking about Amy Poehler when I was there. And again, I got to go to Chicago. I feel like I am a great improviser because, as much as my own skills and instincts and abilities, when I landed in Chicago, because watching improv and learning from good people, having good teachers is a big part of the process too. And that's right when IO was starting, had their space on Clark and Addison. So they had their own space at that point. Armando was starting, and it was the original cast of, you know, everyone who's doing comedy and running comedy right now.
Right. Adam McKay, Amy Poehler.
All the UCB people, Brian McCann.
Tina Fey.
Tina, you know, Brian Stack and Neil Flynn. Just, like, and anyone who would come through. I remember Pasquazi did it once. He was wearing shorts. And at the time, you know, I still say no labels on your shirt, no shorts. Just, you don't have to look like, a T-shirt is fine. Just no, like, fucking Metallica T-shirt or whatever.
Or fucking Unicorn Squad.
Yes, none of that shit. Even if I'm doing a show in a dispensary, like, I don't want that. Regardless, that's my pet peeve. But he was there in, like, shorts, and they were asking him to play. And I was like, who the fuck's this guy they're going to let play in shorts? He didn't do much, so it wasn't like, oh, Pasquazi blew me away. I will actually give a story of TJ.
Hit me.
So this is
TJ Jagodowski.
TJ Jagodowski. This is who's you know, a well-regarded improviser. I was in Chicago before him, and I happened to know this guy who, there was an improv, the stand-up club in Chicago at the time. And this guy, Mike Lucas, was a stand-up there and had access to the place when they were closed.
Yeah.
And we'd be there and we'd run improv games. There were a few places like that. So we were doing a game, 3 Through the Door, which Boom would do at auditions. It's a character game. You just do 3 characters through the door. You come in, you do a character, you walk out, you come and do a different character, come and do a different character. So we were just running this game for each other. And some kid who we didn't know is in there. I was like, who the fuck's this guy? You know, because we're all like, hey, I've been here for, you know, 6 months, man. I'm a veteran. And he just was a different level of characters. It was TJ.
Yeah.
It was the first time I saw him, and I was immediately angry, you know. And then I found out he was a Red Sox fan, and that was it. It sealed the deal. There was never going to be a good friendship there. But he is a very great improviser.
What was next level about his characters?
It was just, they were better than ours. They were just like
more believable.
Yes, like Scott Adsett's another guy who I didn't come up with him. I'm after his time. I saw him at Second City, I think in Pinata or in between shows or something. But to me, he strikes me as like a savant, like a natural. Like, he didn't do IO. I always think if somebody's a great improviser who didn't do IO, that they're a savant. Which is my arrogance again. But he just, like, there's something different. Like, just a little Jordan Peele.
Oh, it's
another guy who, when I knew Jordan when he was in Chicago, but then when Boom came back and did the swap with the main stage,
I was in that show.
That was a high point, I thought, for improv in general, where this international kind of crossovers happening. Both casts were super talented, and both shows, I think, went well in the other environment.
Yeah, so for the listeners, this was like 1 week in the summer. Second City would go over to Boom Chicago and Amsterdam and do shows there for a week or two. And at the same time, we, as the cast of Boom, would go over to Chicago and do our show at Second City. It was like
I only think they did it once.
Program.
Did they do it twice?
I think I'm saying twice, but
no more than twice.
Yeah, no more than twice. I feel like it might have happened the year before I got there, and then I did it in my year. But maybe I'm remembering that wrong, and it was just 1 year that happened.
My guess is it was cost prohibitive because both places were selling their shows out anyway.
Yeah,
so it's like we're just paying to bring a different cast in.
Yeah,
but it was
so fun though.
And at that point, a lot of, in the same way that IO in the '90s infused Second City. In the 2000s, Boom people were starting to come in and be part of those casts. Me, Sue Gillen, a whole bunch of other, Pete Gross, a bunch of people.
Yeah.
And we're starting to be like, oh, Boom is now a talent hub as well.
Yeah.
And then within a year, or actually even within that time, Boom was skipping Second City with people. Like it
Yeah.
became an equivalent.
Yeah.
You do one or the other, or if you want to do both, you can. But whatever.
But yeah, Jordan was always next level.
Yes.
Always,
So you just
even
see
when he
him
was
and it's
like 18.
And Keegan also.
Yes.
When I moved out here, I had a manager come to see me in an improv show it was like a game show. Kind of they do these like pilots for game shows, but it's just in a theater or whatever. And it was me and Keegan doing some of the improv. And my improv was fine, but it's not standing out like his.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's doing characters and shit. That's like, oh, well, yeah, I'd represent him first.
Yeah, that's
you're not kidding.
that guy's a star.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So there are just certain people, and TJ did that at the time. Now
Yeah.
going back to the bookmark,
how you got to host a show. Yeah.
Craig and Pete Gwynn were hosting at the beginning of IO. And me and my friend Scoop and Bob Colhan and Jason Chin was another person who were there every week.
Mm-hmm.
And we went, and sometimes it'd be like us and two other people. So we were up for, and this is how I got so good, because I'd go to the jam and then I'd go to these other open mics and I'd just be performing, it was games and stuff, but scenic games, because that was the thing. And so I was, I could play every night, even if I wasn't on a team. There was some open mic I could go to. And eventually we came to that so much and they were tired of doing it. And they were like, hey, do you guys want to host this? I'm like, yeah. And then I got my classes for free at that point. So I don't think I ever paid for Dell's class. And I took it 3 or 4 times just because. Wow. But I wouldn't have taken it 3 or 4 times if I was paying for it. It was like free. And then I think eventually we also started getting paid because it was packing the place. It was great. And the way things would work at IO is that Charna, when it started, it was Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. It was dark the other nights.
Mm-hmm.
They'd have classes and stuff. But then somebody'd be like, hey, I want to do a Wednesday night show. Nobody wants to come to show on Wednesday. Do the Wednesday night show. People comes, it fills up eventually, and then she'd hand it over to her boyfriend's band, and they'd do a show in that spot for a while. That happened a couple times. Big rig. And it's like, people don't want country music here.
Oh, my God.
Anyway.
Big rig.
That really happened.
That's so funny.
On Wednesdays it happened, and Fridays late I think it happened. But we were hosting that show Saturdays, and then we were hosting the jam, and so you're playing a drunk crowd, like, and trying to control them. That's why I got Boom Chicago. If I had,
because you were already good.
I was good at
wrangling,
games and at wrangling and at working at that pace. Like, IO didn't do games except for the jam.
Mm-hmm.
And
their jam was short form at the time.
It was mostly short form. You do replay. So it was scenic stuff, trying to emphasize that. But it was fun stuff. And we had the run of the place. And one thing I remember early on is that UCB would come in and they learned, this is the Chicago method that Second City claims is their own, but it's really everybody's, of doing scripted material through improv. So they'd come to the jam and try out sketches they want to see what an audience thinks. Mm-hmm. And they always kind of just took over. We'd be like, oh, okay, and we'd let them. But it was always
Second City people just bring a
UCB people.
UCB people.
Besser
just
and Walsh and Amy. They just come in because they ran IO.
Yeah.
They did whatever they wanted.
Were they telling people this is a sketch, or were they pretending that it was an improvised?
They do different things, like because they were big into like fucking with the audience,
pranks and stuff.
So they probably did it, 5-6 times over the few years that I was hosting that thing. Maybe not even, because they moved shortly after I was there, but a few times. But again, they had an arrogance too that influenced me. They were very fast, and this is how, and I can get into theoretically how I think improv changed after they left Chicago. But the point is that show really steeled me and gave me like presence and control of an audience. Mastriani was talking about being high. Mm-hmm. That hasn't been a problem for me in a show. When Second City, when we did the negotiations and they determined that the set was free and not paid, and we didn't have to do it.
The improv set at the end of their sketch shows.
I worked on the main stage, and I also was, maybe we'll get to this, my greatest contributions to improv have not been in the material, although I'm proud of that. It's been in getting money or yelling at the authorities, basically. That's been my accomplishments. But once it was determined that we didn't even have to do the set if we didn't want to, wink, wink. I was, all right, I'll get high before every set now. And I did.
I do want to go back and
Please.
talk about how you think improv changed after the UCB4
Right.
or the more than them, the family left Chicago
I think
for New York.
stylistically, I think the changes in privilege and everything didn't come till the 2010s, maybe later than that, right? When I was out here in LA. And I was thinking about this a lot because I've done fucking every improv except UCB. Now, I know all the UCB people, and I'm very familiar. I've done shows over there. I know the process and everything. But I even went through the whole Groundlings training program. I took a workshop with Gary Austin when I was in Chicago, the founder of the Groundlings. And that was interesting, too, because he's very focused on you and what makes you. He also had a kind of a guru-y, culty kind of like. I'm sure there's women in the workshops where he's like, "You've got really something special."
Yeah,
but that was his.
Let's
like,
go
what's
to my
your
house
essence?
and talk
Yes,
about it.
Let me bring your essence out while I put something else in. But so I think I have a pretty wide base of understanding of all these things. And UCB went and they needed to define a style for a training center. They had always played fast the way they play. Like in an Armando, the people editing are almost always the UCB people. Like their pace was like annoyance theater fast.
Lots of tags
and moving things. What would eventually become JTS Brown, as I always say to Craig Kukowski, that's just a weaselicious show where you like the audience. Like we would do those things to like make the audience angry. Like we're doing these moves and going fat and like fucking with stuff.
Doing theatrical techniques.
Again, hearing Pete Gross talk about it, I felt better because I was doing Armando at the time and they didn't have any people who were in Armando except for TJ. Do the show with them.
That TJ is a foe and
nemesis.
nemesis.
Well, and the Red Sox thing, it just doesn't help things. Also, look, there's maybe 250 of us who are the best improvisers in the world. And I'll put you there because you're doing these shows professionally. You're still performing. You've been doing it for 20 years. And there are people who, if they got back on the horse and, those numbers might rise. But in terms of people who are performing improv right now professionally, let's say, maybe there's 100 on the top level, maybe 200 across the world. And you and I know 75 of the 100, maybe 90 of them.
Yeah.
And TJ and Dave are in that thing too.
Yeah.
So here I'm going to get a little, not even petty, just my own kind of pretension versus theirs. Something that always aggravates me about their show is when they go, "Trust us, this is all made up." And they don't take a suggestion. Now, again, this is a difference in styles. My version of that is taking a suggestion and then telling the audience you're going to ignore it. Now, not necessarily ignoring it, but it's a different relationship with the audience.
Yeah.
It's like they want you to like revere and have a, like kind of the highest appreciation of it.
Yeah.
And I can't give myself that. I want you to be like, this guy, does he want me to like this or not?
Yeah.
I can't help liking it, but I don't know if that's it might be
Have you seen
pathology. Psychiatrist?
Yes. Have you seen Ithamar and Shortall do Delicious Moments?
I heard you also talking with Ithamar about that, and I'm so glad you brought that up because I've watched them a number of times, and I'm astounded by it because I also have an anti-comedy bend.
Yeah.
But mine is again more aggressive, more confrontational to the audience. Like if I'm fucking with the form like them and being like, again, I'll be like, I don't like this scene. Let's go somewhere else. I'll say that to the audience.
Yeah.
I'll edit that way, which is kind of a dismissive way to the whole thing of getting it. But it hopefully maybe, moves things along.
But that's just in like a Weaselicious thing.
Type
so that's
format.
Yes. So
but that's of
explain Weaselicious to the listeners.
Weaselicious is just a group of came out of that jam, and TJ would play with us. It was me basically putting a team together of all the best people who I thought were the best people. We're all great improvisers who are trying to do not bad improv, but fucking with the form in a disrespectful way almost.
And it's almost like a parody of like...
Yes, because it's kind of an answer to the Herald, which has this artistic... And at the time, everyone was talking about... When I came up in the mid-'90s, the Herald was this main form. It's really just a skeleton for inexperienced improvisers to not be scared so they can always lean on this part or this structure or that. And then you get to a point where you just want to skip through that and kind of avoid the structure.
And as someone who you have been a self-proclaimed hater of authority, Weaselicious provides this nice antidote to the poison of prescriptive, pretentious, theatrical pretense. Yeah.
And yet it is as pretentious as anything else because we're doing it like we're so fucking great that we're going to fuck this up in front of you.
Yeah, but it's sort of like I always took from it the flavor of like you're not actually being dicks about improv. It's a character. It's
we present as dicks and we try to then I think that's the ethos there is like I've been saying, I don't know why. It's the anti-authority.
Yeah.
You're right. And the audience is the authority at a certain point. Dude, this is like therapy. Because I was just talking about how I would have those self-indulgent conversations with the director of the program. And that's like 30 years ago.
Yeah.
You've put it all together.
You owe me money. What do you pay your therapist?
You're my improv therapist because like the whole argument of self-indulgent versus serving the audience is something that I clearly battle with, or maybe I found a way to bring it together.
And in that go ahead.
No,
in that model, you are being self-indulgent, but in a way that like maybe your justification internally is that does serve the audience because it shows the audience that there's another way and that they don't actually have to only copy people, and that isn't this really about all of us being in the moment and having an experience together? And didn't all of this spring from Dell's desire and with the committee to play around and find something new? So can't we do that again instead of doing the old? Which
it's my trust us. It's all made up. I'm just as bad as them.
Right.
So that's what I also understand is that I'm just as bad as anyone else at the arrogance and the pretension of it.
I have to say personally, I do wish TJ and Dave would take a suggestion because also I'm like, why not? If you don't have to like lean on it and have it be a theme, but if the suggestion is coffee, you can start by making coffee and just at least honor something that they've.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a part of me that there are, and again, art is very important, but like you still have a sense of humor about it.
That's gonna be your quote. Is just art is very important.
It's such an in-depth conversation, and that's their art, and that's how they choose to do that. So judging that is, but it's my art. It's my art form too. So that's where I feel like I can be a critic of it.
Yeah,
I know I've been all over the place. Get me back.
I want to tie up the how the UCB people leaving Chicago.
We all admired them. They left. So the speed and the pace of UCB was what they left behind. They evolved it into their way because they had to formalize it for a teaching thing. Mm-hmm. They had to have this is the UCB way.
Yeah, they had to like reverse engineer what they were doing and put terminology to it.
I used to say what they were doing is they took the IO recipe and removed the most bitter ingredient.
The most
My
bitter
good friend
ingredient.
Charna. But the style was different in what they did, and they kind of codified that so that they would have something to teach people. I think in Chicago the pace remained, but the listening is the primary thing in Chicago improvising, not initiating.
Yeah.
I think in UCB initiating can be the primary focus because you can initiate something clearly into a game.
Yeah.
Whereas in Chicago, and I'm just generalizing Chicago, but it's really kind of IO, and my time in IO blew into what most of Chicago was in the 2000s. It's all listening based. Mm-hmm. And that's why I know I'm a good improviser, because a premium wise ass is only listening to be able to respond.
Right.
So without knowing it my whole life, the skill of listening in order to respond with something cutting or whatever it may be fits right into improv.
You were already so primed for this because as a 9-year-old, you're like combing a sentence that the potential bully is saying so you could grab one word and use it against them.
And honestly, just like in those early days, my early days in Chicago, I sustained a lot of beatings from other improvisers too, often on stage. Just my personality, not like kick the shit up, but like I'm the kind of guy who people want to like beat up, even if it's pretend beat up. Get a couple good shots in there. That's just the nature of my interactions with humanity.
As you said before, by your design.
I guess so.
Because you're mirroring your relationship with your mother. You owe me another check for that.
Yeah, the mother stuff I've been handling with the other
never
therapists.
Mind. All
but
right.
this improv stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah. And also I think some of it is a little bit of like I don't know if it's a resentment or just a thought of like the absurdity of it all. Like, I don't think there's necessarily should be that revering of it. I think it's impressive when we can improvise a show. Like I said, I really don't think there's more than 100, 200 people in the world who you bring 4 of them up there in one word and an audience of 500 people, they got no problem doing that.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's when you say it like that, that's kind of an impressive thing.
I was thinking about that recently, like while watching the Olympics, and like you watch the opening ceremonies or and you look at like how many athletes that are just like the best at their thing, and I was like, that's kind of like improv. Like there aren't that many of us who've been doing it for 30 years consistently, like every day or every week, and it is still like a young art form, and people drop off or people, it is. It's pretty exciting to think about it that way. And
there are thousands of aspiring people who want to do that, and some drop out at different levels, some become fans, some and
a lot of really naturally talented people who haven't been doing it as long, but are like very exciting to watch right now. It's cool. It's cool to see. I want to talk earnestly because you've like leaned on like being this and back
please,
of the bus guy who's like a little too cool about it.
I also love improv.
Right. I want to talk about that. Like, what do you love about improv? What does it do for you, and what has it done for your life?
Well, first of all, and this is for anyone in our position, most people don't have friends. Like, the least funny of our friends is the funniest fucking person in
would be the funniest
99
person anywhere.
People's.
Yeah.
And again, the least funny of our friends is hilarious.
Yeah. Ike. Are you talking about Ike?
Thank you for saying it. Ike Barinholtz, by the way. If you had any. There's other Ikes out there, but Ike Barinholtz, I think, did he win an award, like the least funny man to work consistently? Something like that? I actually think he's almost always the funniest person, whatever he's in. Same with Meadows, which is, whatever they're in is really hilarious. But the people, that's the first thing.
Yeah.
Because, and when I was talking to you about privilege and those lessons came to me through improv. And I think I would be a fool to not credit Susan Messing incredibly. One, Susan Messing is, obviously this guru. I was married to her. We have a child together. We are no longer married. But, I lived with her for 10 years or something. And when I started, like 98, 96, maybe, she was of the kind of generation before me and was my introduction to all of those people. I knew shit about Second City, how they treated their people before I even thought of auditioning for she kind of brought me into that world, and I was ahead of the game in a way that I knew all these people kind of the generation before. I could ask them questions. I talked to them more. It's, I think, kind of how I got so invested in the history of all this stuff is that I got to know my heroes first through her being one of them. Like, it was Amy Poehler, Susan, Tina Fey, and Rachel Dratch. I probably would have married any of those women at a certain point. I'm glad I married Susan, but also a strong woman like that. We talk about what that world was like then. Even Susan will tell you, who people, she, I think, correctly projects as like a take no shit person.
Right.
Even she's writing a book at some point and should, but in earlier like drafts of it, she had, passages where it's like, ladies, you just, sometimes you just got to kind of like plow through. And she's like, why would I say that?
Right. Just
because that's
stay quiet and keep your head down.
And she's not someone who ever stays quiet.
Right.
But even her, who had to go through that early 90s period, and it stretched, she's one of the best teachers of improv. Her struggle to teach, she had to coach like 4 or 5 teams simultaneously. Then she's coaching like the 4 best teams at IO before she can get a class. She was, I'll fucking because she won't bitch about it. So Second City told her not to swear in the same show that Eddie Furman was in. That's fucking bullshit.
Right. And he's swearing up and down.
The two of them were at the Annoyance Theater. That's
Right.
what it's about.
Right.
And I've said fuck on the stage there. Like, everyone should be able
but
to.
But she was told.
She was the only one told
because a lady
not to.
never swears.
Right.
Yeah.
Because she's co-ed prison sluts. Well, so's Ed. Ed is the dirtiest fucking mouth I've ever heard.
Right.
Hilarious and wasn't restricted.
Yeah.
Regardless.
No, it's bullshit.
So that was good that and again, Susan, when I got hired at Boom, I was not living with her. She had kicked me out of the house for being unemployed. I was living with Dana and Julia for like a week. And then I had the greatest audition of my life for Boom Chicago. I fucking killed it. I was the best one in that room. I don't know that I've been the best audition ever. Amber had a great audition I saw. A couple other people have had great auditions. I was one of them. I sang, like, doing shit that, like, because living with Dana and Julia.
The requirement of the job you did?
Yeah. Dana and Julia, living with those two, and they're these improv women. That'll get you. It motivated me to get a job. So, but then I wasn't going to take it.
What about it?
Just Dana and Julia. I don't know. They're these women. They're like. What's great about I love them because they turn the thing. They make men uncomfortable in the way that misogynist asshole men make women uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Ironic that what happened to them happens.
Right.
With the Louis C.K. shit. Look it up, folks. Don't worry about it. That's another thing. That happened for sure because the day it happened, the whole city of Chicago knew it happened.
I was one of them.
All knew.
Yeah, we all knew. Yeah.
So like 1,000, and I feel
there's
bad
no
that the
doubt
city
that
didn't
it
do
happened
I know.
among. Yeah,
I know.
It's yeah.
But I wasn't going to go because I was so on the well, Turco. Well, I'll miss my slots at I.O. She's like, all you do is you have no job, you smoke weed all the time, and do improv. You could move to Amsterdam, smoke weed all the time, and do improv.
Right.
So I can't believe I wasn't going to take the job. But she talked me into taking the job. I did. It was great. And,
yeah.
I met Matt. I met Brendan and Ike and I. We knew each other before, but I went there with those guys and had a great time. And then came back and did Second City. Like, if someone offers you a job, don't hold out for something else.
No, take it.
Because it ain't coming.
Especially
or
a
if
job
it does,
in comedy. Yeah.
And then, again, as I said, I came back so much better.
Yeah.
My first show I wrote at Boom was awful. My writing was horrible. I was defensive. I wasn't good at it. I was still a good improviser and could, maintain my position that way. But if I didn't fail so horribly in the one show we wrote there, Second City would not have come as easily as it did.
Because you had already had the growing pain of,
more in letting go of the bad ideas and not being attached to your shit. Because I didn't have really any good ideas in that show. So the fact that I kept pushing stuff was like, why?
Was it just ego? You
Yes,
you
it was
wanted
like,
to
I
have
wanna have
stuff in the
something
show. Yeah.
But I wasn't able to turn improv into scripted at that point.
Yeah. So what improv has mostly done for your life is friends, community.
I think that, and it's made me a better person. That's what I meant. Susan was the beginning to realizing that women's place was different in this world. And then as I said, my idea of a cast is all my buddies and a couple of their girlfriends. When I got to Second City, on the stage especially, I was in a cast with Ithamar, Brian Gallivan, and Amber at one point. And I want to mention this because it was a big show between Barack and a Hard Place. We got a cover story on the Chicago Magazine and the Sun-Times or the Trib, whatever. And the reporter brought the three of us, and this was a very big moment in my life. Brought me, Molly, and Brad, the three I.O. veterans, had been in Chicago for 12 years, white, straight.
Yeah, the three white straight people.
I mean, you got a Jewish guy and a woman. I was the most regular of all of us, but still within the improv world, the three of us were pretty standard. Then you have Brian, a gay man. You have Ithamar Enriquez, a Hispanic man. And you have Amber, an African-American woman. So when they interviewed us, there was the three of us and then the three of them. And this is something I learned. One is that reporters like to ask questions that might be provocative. So I answered a question with no context. I didn't give the context. My answer was about how the three of us had been in Chicago for a long time, and the three of them had not, but they were all on the stage together. What I was not contextualizing was the fact that there are no gay people, there are no Hispanic people, there are no black people in this community. So the fact that we even got anyone in here is great. And of course, they're going to be like fast. Like, I wasn't giving the answer that had the understanding of why they were there. I was making it sound like, oh, these are like, I was making it sound like they were DEI. And that was not my intention. But seeing how it came across was a lesson for me, and that it hurt their feelings, and it wasn't. But the lesson that I learned, and I had learned it before when Claudia was in my cast, was what you can do with the diversity. If you're someone who wants to do satire, who wants to do social commentary, who purports to punch up, you need to have the oppressed people, like they're the voices that need to be speaking. ESPN, around the same time that Second City and IO, and they all had their racial reckoning, ESPN was dealing with something, and there's a woman named Jamel Hill, who's a black sports reporter, and she said that ESPN wanted black faces, but they didn't want the black voices.
Wow.
And I think that is something that kind of echoed the Second City experience, where it's like, yeah, we've diversified and everything, but then also embrace the people you've brought in and allow them to, like, you know, to speak their experience. And I think sometimes that experience got a little scary for the white-owned, white-operated, run theater for 50 years. And even me had to recognize those biases. In saying that, there was some resentment, perhaps, of like, I've been here forever. They were those shows were great because of all six of us. It wasn't like these three straight people are carrying this show.
Right.
You know, not at all. And the things we were able to do in that show was due to the fact that it wasn't a 1967 cast.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't doing the white savior kind of, because I still think that's a liberal theater and should be, because I think that's the compassionate way to be. But if you want to have the other voice in there, you know, go for it. But you also need the voices of the people who deserve social commentary.
Yes, and the people experiencing the things that you're commenting on, like. Yeah, that is the purpose of this venue of expression.
Yes,
is for the expression to take place,
and that's where the cooperative. You know, we were an ensemble of all these different things, and that show, probably the best show I was in, was also the most diverse. And I think there wasn't like we were an ensemble of 6 people, regardless of what the other additives were to that. And that's always that's the thing I like about improv. No matter, I've been in a couple casts with people who I wouldn't have been friends with, perhaps, but I love them in the cast, and that didn't affect any kind of working thing because I can't help but want it to be good.
Yeah.
Even if I want to be self-indulgent, like I'm saying, I still want it to be something. It becomes we-indulgent. It can't be something I just like. It has to be something we all like if you're in a cast or an ensemble. So maybe that's the way to temper the self-indulgence, is to like spread it out amongst, well, if it's something we all like, it can't be indulgent, right?
Right. Well, and also to some extent, it's like, who cares? I guess if it's indulgent at the expense of the audience or leaves the audience behind, then that sucks.
Right.
Like, it can't be indulgent instead of inclusive of the audience experience.
Carol Burnett's show, smirking, is including the audience.
Yes. Yeah. If we're everyone in the whole room, like if we include the audience in our grand ensemble, that's the ultimate indulgence.
Yes.
Because ultimately, theater and comedy is indulgent. We're indulging in joy together. We are taking a break from societal ills to come into a room and have a group experience where we agree on what's funny and we laugh together.
And it's the joy of it. And that's kind of why improv will never translate as well. Maybe, hopefully, they can come to some packaging that makes it filmable in a really good way. But like the way we do it long form on a stage, just shooting that will never translate the same way it does on the audience, because it is that moment. And one thing I kind of like, and I'm torn, like I love that art is valuable, but it's always dead artists who are valuable. When I'm talking about fine art or whatever, like in people monetizing someone else's art, improv is something interesting in that
the only value is while you're alive.
Right there.
Yeah, right.
I put that show out there. You see it, you got to see it. You don't see it, you didn't get it that night.
Should have been there.
Yeah. And now for the performer, they should really remember their funny shit and write it down and use that. I mean, I bet, of the 500 funniest things you said, you don't remember 450 of them. They were an improv
more.
show, right?
Yeah.
Right.
499
490,
and a half.
right. Yeah. So again, and there are some who are able to, that's where stand-ups, they'd remember every fucking thing, but they'd be thinking about that instead of the whole show.
Well, there's another way to frame it, though. I'm of the mind that, like, if I don't think of the funny things I say on stage as these precious things that need to be clung to, then more will come, and it's this continuous trust
you're not gonna
exercise.
Run out. Yeah,
never.
That's interesting.
It's abundance. It would be like taking a swim in the ocean and be like, I have to hang on to this handful of water because I'm really enjoying this experience, and I want to take this home. It's like, no, just go back in the water tomorrow.
I like
Keep
that.
swimming.
That's good.
It's free. It's abundant. Let's do some rapid fire questions
Please.
to close it out.
Please.
What are your favorite character types to play?
Well, I think something that's other than a high status like commenter on things, although I probably play that the most frequently. Like, I like getting in scenes with Dan Antonucci, who is just nonsense. He's like I like being high status, getting flummoxed, where the low status person is winning. That's it. I like to be the losing high status person who gets angry. And like the group, I know I've been talking like I'm like Mr. Equality and everything. The two groups that I play with are Dratch played with us, thank God. But I was going to say they're exclusively male. One's called Mr. Johnson, and it's just all dudes. And I it's not on purpose. It's like we all moved out here at the same time.
It's because there aren't enough hot chicks around.
And the other group that I performed with was all dudes, and luckily Rachel Dratch came and played with us in some. I think it's necessary, actually, most of the time.
So that people don't murder you for being a misogynist?
Well, I end up always playing the women when it's us. And Meadows, Tim said to me after we did some shows, and this is a reveal of me, he's like, how come every time you play my wife, you're playing some ugly lady? He's like, you're such a nasty wife every time. Charna is like my character that I go to. So I'm always playing Charna as his wife. He's like, why are you always playing this angry lady? I'm like, that's
Charna.
So we need women to play some better characters.
Oh my God. Okay. So you're like a flustered, overwhelmed, like voice of reason character that's losing ground
so voice
and can't.
of reason.
Yeah.
It's like I'm the ultimate straight man.
Yeah.
That's why I think like the Groundlings and I wouldn't.
Yeah, I
I mean, I'd
cannot
be great
picture
working
you.
with all those Groundlings. Like, I heard Heather's thing, and God bless her for being so blatant about it.
Mm-hmm.
They're all so talented, the Groundlings. And I've done long form with them. I'm not afraid to say that their form is antiquated, and they can stop taking suggestions for the improvisers throughout the show.
Right.
Like, let them roll. These people are talented.
They're great. Yeah.
Stop making it about the director in these shows.
Yeah.
Like, if you want to keep doing it that way, that's fine. But it's gone beyond that. You don't need it.
Yeah, you don't have to. Yeah,
It's like fucking doing, and calling that jazz or something.
Right. Yeah, because they do these little like short form vignettes where
and
it's like,
they ask
how
the
about
audience, what is he thinking? What does he do for a living? What is he wearing?
Yeah.
All those things the improviser can do on their own.
Right. And now there's no discovery, and there's
You're doing, it's a director's. Like like I'd love to direct one of those shows, but it's just like calling a game.
Right. Yeah. Do you have you just said you love playing with Dan Antonucci. Do you have other favorite people you love to play with?
I do. Brad Morris.
He's so fun to play with.
And yet off stage, our paces are so different. I finish every fucking sentence after the first word when he's talking because he's got these pauses. It's great. And on stage we can do, but when he and I talk, I just get so mad because he's so slow.
What do you like about improvising with him?
His face is hilarious. He doesn't need to say anything. Like his expressions. The best scene I ever did at Second City, I wasn't on stage for. I'm just voiceovering, and he's out on stage reacting the whole time. So I, quote unquote, am getting these laughs on his reactions, really.
Yeah.
Having him and Rachel Dratch in the same show, I was like, their faces, their
It's
eyes are, I got these little beady little fucking stoner eyes. They are very expressive.
Yeah.
Matt Craig is like a cartoon. Like he moves around. He's a fabulous, great improviser. I really enjoyed when I was on main stage playing a lot with Emily Wilson. I also like playing with Susan Messing. We play well together because she plays crazy, wacky characters.
And you can ground it with the voice of
And we've done a few shows since our divorce. She does a show called
fun.
Messing with a Friend, but it's always Messing with an Ex when it's me.
Oh, fun.
And she just fucking pimps me into like wedding scenes and like it's I don't know if it's her like she is on the like she gets up for those shows. I feel like no other shows. She's great in those shows, and it's constant like putting me into like situations of awkwardness. They're very fun shows, but it's like I am it's like a battle. But again, we both have the urge to be self-indulgent while pleasing the audience.
Yeah.
It is I also, again, I loved playing with Molly Erdman, my wife now, who was also on the main stage. I enjoy, to the point about Groundlings, Laurel Kopic, I like her characters that she plays. I could play very well with her. And Ryan Gall.
Yeah, he's so fun to play with.
He's like one of those naturals, I think. Like, again, he used to do I.O. too and stuff. Like, he's the reason I think the Groundlings should stop fucking doing it that way.
Stop meddling.
He doesn't need it. Whatever you're going to ask the audience for is worse than what he's going to provide you.
Right.
So why do that?
Yeah, why are you outsourcing? Why are you crowdsourcing the creativity to all the least creative people?
I'm not bagging on the people.
No.
I just think the form is...
But think
I know
about
people get mad about that, but I can defend it.
But think about the equivalent. If you have like a team of electricians come to wire your house and they're like, hey, why don't you do the dangerous part? Here, why don't you plug the... It's like if I'm buying a $25 theater ticket to watch creative minds who have trained in this do their thing, I don't want all of the meat and potatoes of the scene to be crowdsourced to all the people sitting in the seats with me. I want to watch the creative people do their thing.
Yes.
I want to see what their brain comes up with. Different than asking for a suggestion, but to have it be hesitation style where it's like, and now what's this? And now where do they work? And what's he going to say when she comes in?
Yes.
all that. Fucking let them do a scene.
Again, I think it's frustrating to the audience and the performers.
Yeah.
It's just for whoever that director is. One little tangent of amongst 1,000. You were talking about a team of electricians.
Yeah.
And in the Khaki episode, he revealed that Charna started with teams of rabbis.
Yeah.
I swear, just yesterday I asked her about that. So I guess she knew a cantor or she knew some rabbinical training place that she went to. And that's how the rabbis got put together. She got the cops together because she was going to use it as a fundraiser for bulletproof vests for the cops and got a team of cops together on that. There were also psychiatrists or psychologists. She didn't know how they got together, and maybe it was doctors was the other one. But that I wanted to get that answer because I knew that had happened.
So funny.
So the rabbis were the first ones, I guess. And then cops, rabbis and cops.
Next time you talk to her, ask her why she's so mean.
I mean, I know why.
Oh, why?
Have you ever met her mom?
No. Oh, Lord help us.
Lord help Charna.
Yeah.
I met her mom a couple times, and her mom wouldn't have let me back into the theater.
Mm-hmm.
That's the difference.
Yeah, got it.
I'd be gone forever. There's no, like, I don't know. You made a comment before, and we should not necessarily have compassion in this instance, but you kind of made a comparison to Trump when we were, and you're not the first person to compare Trump and Charna.
Yeah.
The mothers are what they both have in common.
Well, and Trump's dad was a huge asshole too. Yeah. But you know, we are not responsible for the trauma that happens to us, but we are responsible for healing from it so that we don't inflict trauma on others. And that is how I will close.
That's great. That's wonderful.
Yeah, if you had any advice to tell improvisers who are studying right now or starting out, what would you say?
I think if you can, like, do that, just pretend to be. Like, if you're in a scene and it's like, I'm a dad, just pretend to be a dad. Like whatever that, and pretend as realistically as you can to be whatever that is. I don't know if that's my process necessarily now. And again, listening. In our it's all about listening, because that's when the audience is impressed, is when they know you've listened to something and you respond. Like, again, you can come out with a funny initiation line and that's fine for itself, but you're going to get so much more off a funny retort. Again, this is what I learned in my life being a wise ass, but it applies to, like, if you respond to something, that's where the audience is like, oh, there's the trick. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like, oh, I just threw this thing out there. They see the listening. And I think listening and just knowing that the audience doesn't know what you don't know. Mm. That's another thing where it's like, if the only other real like lesson I do when I'm teaching, and this won't convey in audio, but I'm just like I'm just rubbing the side of this couch. I don't even know what I'm doing, but I'm committed to doing it. And, if I do it long enough, it looks like I know why I'm doing it. But eventually I'll be like, God, this blood will never come out, but I didn't know that when I started doing that.
Yeah.
So you just do it, fake it till you make it, I suppose, is one thing. It's hard after doing it for so long where it becomes natural to necessarily, unless I'm watching to give notes. But I think just pretend as much as you can, and don't put more into it than that. Because if you're just pretending to be a cop and you're really doing all that, everything you see will be through the eyes of the cop.
Yeah.
And you'll be living that experience, and that will be your reactions will be, genuine.
Great. Cool, man. Is there anything you want to plug?
Yes, there is. One, no matter where you work, no matter who it is, your boss is a liar. That's just for everybody out there. Keep that in mind. And if you're the ultimate boss, well, it stops with you.
I'm my own boss. I'm a
that's the one thing.
Self-employed.
I'm all for self-employment because it's kind of the only employment I'm getting these days. I wonder why. But I did a podcast with Dan Backetall and the guys in Mr. Johnson that really is kind of improv centered. It's called Mr. Johnson's Time Machine. It's a history podcast, quote unquote. That's the other thing we realized. We're trying to do history scenarios. Mm-hmm. Women just get like shaved out of history. It's like so
Joe,
hard finding.
Welcome.
I'm
fucking welcome.
I know.
Dude.
I know it. I'm trying to explain that I recognize the world for what it is. Look up Betworthy. It's a job I have. It's sports comedy. It's called Betworthy. If you like sports and comedy. One other thing I'll say along the lines of your boss is a liar. I was thinking this the other day. So if you're somebody who's like pro-management, pro-unregulated business, right? Like the real right-wing, like let it all libertarian. Do you know what you would have been for in 1864? Slavery.
Oh, of course.
That's the pro-business, like unregulated thing. So just if that's your opinion now, know that you would have been pro-slavery back then.
Of course.
And it's the same fucking thought process. That's not an improv note. That's just a life note. I'm sorry. I am this way because of Second City. A lot of people learn how to get jobs on SNL. I learned how to be a satirical person, and I unfortunately don't save it just for the stage.
Right.
I'm just doing. I'm thinking it all the time.
Satire is born from cynicism, which is born from realism.
I guess so. Yeah, that's
clear eyes. Yeah. Well, thanks for being here.
This was a treat. Thank you, and I'm so glad you're doing this. And it's very clear in listening and talking with you. You know your shit.
Thanks. Yeah. And at some point, we'll have to have you back to finish the thought that you started at the beginning of it.
Sure. Yes.
If you like this podcast, you can support us and get a ton of bonus content over at yesalso.supercast.com. If you have a question about improv that you'd like us to answer on one of our future Q&A episodes, send it on over to yesalsopod@gmail.com. Remember to follow us on Instagram at yesalsopod and keep sharing us with your improv communities. We love the love. If you're a theater who would like to host us for a live recording and improv show, let us know at yesalsopod@gmail.com. A huge shout out to Ryan Rosenberg, who produced this thing with his generous help and his unlimited knowledge about all things podcast. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week. No, we won't, Susie. That's not how podcasts work. They won't even see us. They will listen to us. So it's actually the opposite of both things you said. Thanks for listening, and you will listen to us next week. Maybe. We don't know.